And we're really glad to have so many people joining us. I know you're here for Bonnie and for Ms. Wong and for Deepa, not for me, so I'll keep it short. Just to inform you what NATA is, so North American Taiwan Studies Association is a graduate student organization that dedicates to the study of Taiwan. And we're founded in 1994, so this is actually our 27th annual conference. So this is part of our program this year. So tomorrow we have more programming. So if you would like to join our event, feel free to register at the table there. And this year's theme is Taiwan Studies and Application. Therefore, we invite important people outside academia, but doing very significantly important work for Taiwan studies here. And I would like to introduce our moderator today, and her name is Deepa Lapoli. Did I say that right? Okay. And yes, Deepa is a research professor of international affairs, and she's also the associate director of the Sigur Center for Asian Studies. That's where we are at right now. And she directs the Rising Powers Initiative that tracks foreign policy debates in major powers of Asia and Eurasia. And she's a specialist on Indian foreign policies and India-China relationship and comparative foreign policy outlook of rising star and the rise of nationalism in foreign policy. And I would like to say, I think it's really good to have women in security studies, and this is a topic that keep coming up in our discussion today. And I think it's really great that we have three outstanding women with us today to share with us their experiences and their thoughts on this topic. So without further ado, please give a round of applause.
Thank you so much. I must say it's both a strange and wonderful feeling to be among everybody here face to face. This is sort of what I call our comeback conference from 2 years of COVID restrictions. But today I want to also thank the co-sponsors of this event today. We have quite a few, that NATSA, National Resource Center, and TERP, as well as the Sigur Center, of course. Let me just say that, today the idea of the Indo-Pacific, as you know, has gained enormous momentum between 2017 and 2022. It has gained a lot of momentum across these years, across two very different US administrations. And what's more, I think now what we're seeing is that the US and its partners are what I call walk the talk, because we heard a lot of discourse before this. And the recognition of Taiwan as a key strategic and economic actor and partner is also gaining ground, not only in the US, but also Europe and other important countries in the region like Japan, India, and Australia. And so today, given that we're talking about the Indo-Pacific, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the role of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was really, in some sense, a key architect of the concept of Indo-Pacific, and of course, his tragic and untimely death. Condolences for that, and we will miss him deeply in this conversation as we move forward. We're looking ahead. The topic here is looking ahead at Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, I know it's a Saturday night, and I want to thank you all for joining us, not only in person, but also we have many, many online. And I know it's going to be informative with two absolutely stellar speakers. Maybe even we'll try to make it a little entertaining. If not, you can make it entertaining, given it's a Saturday night. But I promise to let you all out by 8. I won't keep you too long. So with that, let me just say that we're going to start off with Deputy Representative today, followed by Bonnie. And I'm going to introduce both those speakers to give us a sense of, when you look ahead, what they are viewing. First of all, I think both of these speakers need very little introduction because you know them quite well already. They're very well known in the field. And Deputy Representative has started in January 2021, but she's no stranger to Washington because she was here earlier several years as Deputy Director of the Political Division of TechRow. She has held very senior positions across the globe for Taiwan and especially on international organizations. She's a leading expert. I've heard her here passionately and eloquently talk about the need for Taiwan's greater engagement in international organizations. So welcome back, Deputy Representative Wong. It's a distinct pleasure and honor to have you back. Following her will be Bonnie Glaser, who is a very big name in both Taiwan and China studies. She's, of course, now the director of the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund, and I learned all about the German Marshall Fund just now. A lot of things I didn't know about it. But of course, she's very well known as the former director of the China Power Project at CSIS, and she is highly published and always appearing on various media, especially she's very active on social media. I'm sure she'll say something about the conference afterwards on social media. So first of all, let me turn to Deputy Representative Wong and ask her to give us a little bit of, take us through what she sees as what Taiwan's challenge in the Indo-Pacific is and how Taiwan is approaching these and preparing to meet them. And especially in the background of U.S. increasing cooperative mechanisms in the Indo-Pacific, like the Quad, like the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, and so on. So without further ado, I'll ask him to speak for about 12 to 15 minutes, and then we'll turn to questions. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Deepa, for the very kind introduction and for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure to join you on the discussion of Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific region. And I'm particularly glad to meet with participants from the North American Taiwan Studies Association, also today's co-host. I think that you have decided to come here on a raining yet relaxing Saturday evening rather than sipping beer at the waterfront shows your true care for and commitment to Taiwan. And I appreciate you're all being here with us. And I'm also looking forward to Bonnie's talk, as I'm a big fan of her podcast. So if you have not done so, I highly recommend you follow her on the podcast app of your choice. And but before I start, I also want to offer our sincerest condolences on the passing of the former Prime Minister Abe. His passing was felt deeply in Taiwan. We have lost a good friend. But as Deepa pointed out, his vision on a free and open Indo-Pacific will continue to be important in the collaborations among countries in the region. And I think today's topic is certainly timely. You may have noticed that recently there are more and more high-ranking, high-level statements including the communique that issued after the G7 Leaders Summit, which concluded just 2 weeks ago, all have one key element in common, and that is to underscore the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. A similar statement can be found at this year's Japan-Australia Leaders Meeting and the EU-Japan Summit as well. Also, the joint statement following President Biden's meeting with Prime Minister Kishida of Japan and President Yoon of Korea in late May both reiterate the importance of preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait as an essential element to ensure security and prosperity across the Indo-Pacific region. The renewed attention and concern towards the Indo-Pacific is a result of China's increasingly aggressive and assertive behavior in pursuing its goals of reshaping the international order and the way of global governance. As the Biden administration pointed out in its Indo-Pacific strategy published in February of this year, the People's Republic of China pursues a sphere of influence in the Indo-Pacific and seeks to become the world's most influential power. In accordance with this goal, we have witnessed the Chinese Communist regime accelerate its authoritarian agenda both at home and abroad. Just yesterday, when G20 ministers were meeting in Indonesia seeking ways to safeguard the peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, China was engaging in activities to unilaterally destabilize the region by sending warplanes to intentionally breach the median line of the Taiwan Strait. In the meantime, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's no-limits partnership with Russia has undoubtedly served as a wake-up call for democratic countries. As democratic principles and human rights are under threat from authoritarian regimes in the region, democracies have now come to realize that we need to work together and stand with each other to defend democracy. And in the Indo-Pacific, Taiwan is at the forefront of the fight against anti-democratic forces. But I want to stress, instead of view Taiwan as a flashpoint, democratic countries should recognize Taiwan as an indispensable security and economic partner in the Indo-Pacific region. And that's exactly what Taiwan is preparing and positioning itself for. We are ready to assume the role of an indispensable partner in contributing to global supply chains and resisting authoritarian expansionism. We appreciate that the Secretary Blinken made it clear in his speech back in May that the U.S. will continue to expand cooperation with Taiwan on our many shared interests and values, support Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organization, and deepen our economic ties. We are also encouraged that the European Union strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific has pledged to strengthen cooperation with Taiwan. Therefore, today, I want to take this opportunity to brief you on some of our efforts and progress towards expanding cooperation with like-minded countries with the focus on our agenda with the United States. And the first item on our agenda, without a doubt, security. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has alarmed the people of Taiwan to the risk of conflict with the authoritarian neighbor. We are grateful that the U.S. government continues to uphold its security commitment to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relation Act and the 6 assurances. The Biden administration has already announced 4 arms sales, highlighting the great importance that the U.S. government places on Taiwan's national defense need. Of course, we understand that Taiwan's security is our own responsibility. So we have been in close discussion with the U.S. on ways to further strengthen Taiwan's self-defense with a focus on building our asymmetric capabilities and supporting the reform of our reserve force to enhance Taiwan's defense and social resilience. We are also identifying pathways for cooperations with like-minded partners on cybersecurity, Coast Guard, and the National Guard. In the meantime, economic security is an essential part of national security, particularly when we realize that China has not shied away from weaponizing its economic influence. China's economic coercion of Lithuania and Taiwan through irrational product bans, including the claimed COVID positive mangoes, are some recent examples. We see great need in a deepening coordination among democracies in enhancing economic security. And Taiwan will continue to play a crucial role in creating secure global supply chains that protect critical technologies from authoritarian exploitation. In this regard, as Deepa mentioned earlier, Taiwan and the US has established several solid platforms for discussions on bilateral and the regional economic and trade issues of common concern. Other than the resumption of the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, also known as TIFA talks, the US and Taiwan have also launched the Technology Trade and Investment Framework that will help the development of commercial programs and explore actions to strengthen critical supply chains. Also, late last year, we held the second high-level Economic Prosperity Partnership dialogue with the US. Both sides discussed supply chain resilience, resisting the PRC's economic coercion, cooperation on 5G and network security issues, and collaboration in the field of science and technology. And of course, the exciting news you've heard about is the launch of the US-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade. Under this initiative, both sides discussed the development of an ambitious roadmap for negotiations of trade agreements with high standard commitment and economically meaningful outcome in 11 areas, including digital trade enhancement, trade facilitation, environmental protection, among others. And those are also key issues for the economics and trade in the Indo-Pacific, which is of great strategic significance. In the meantime, Taiwan will continue to seek participation in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, IPAF, so as to continue to contribute to concerted efforts to advance openness and prosperity in the region. Another area we are seeing positive momentum is Taiwan's international participation. In fact, just yesterday, the European Parliament adopted the report on the EU and the defense of multilateralism, which expresses support for international initiative calling for Taiwan's meaningful participation as an observer in meetings, mechanisms, and activities of multilateral bodies. We are also grateful that Secretary Blinken recently noted that Taiwan's international participation is not a political issue, but a pragmatic one. And the US has called for like-minded countries to jointly support Taiwan's robust, meaningful participation throughout the UN system and in the international community. Furthermore, US high-ranking officials have publicly stated that the PRC has misused UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 to prevent Taiwan's meaningful participation in the international community, and thereby denying the international community the ability to gain valuable contributions that Taiwanese has to offer. I can share with you one most recent example. Just last week, China blocked two Pacific Island nations' credentials to the UN Ocean Conference because Taiwanese experts were listed on their delegations list, even though it's common practice for member states to include non-national experts in their delegation. In fact, no member states of the UN should have any right to dictate the composition of other member states' delegation. This is a clear violation of other countries' sovereignty right in the UN system. And this incident, again, reflects how China is exerting its influence in the international system. To allow effective multilateral cooperation, like-minded countries, democratic countries, must work together to safeguard the value in international systems as well. And for Taiwan, even when its exclusion from international institutions has made it difficult, we are still committed to act as a responsible stakeholder and a force of good in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And we are taking a pragmatic and professional approach to work with democratic countries in responding to regional and global challenges. Taiwan's participation in the US-led Summit for Democracy and COVID-19 Summit, and our joint efforts with the United States, Japan, Australia, under the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, also known as GCTF, have showcased Taiwan's ability and willingness to contribute to work on global issues. And we are confident that we can make substantial contributions towards new multilateral initiatives, such as the partners in the Blue Pacific and Quad, in areas such as public health, infrastructure, supply chain resilience, and emerging technologies. Looking forward, Taiwan will continue to firmly demonstrate its resolve in self-defense while safeguarding its democratic way of life. And we appreciate that the US has stated in its Indo-Pacific strategy that the US will work with partners inside and outside of the region to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, including by supporting Taiwan's self-defense capabilities to ensure an environment in which Taiwan's future is determined peacefully in accordance with the wishes and best interests of Taiwanese people. We also call for like-minded countries to send a consistent message and call out China's attempts to unilaterally change the status quo and threaten regional security. China needs to understand that it can prosper only if it abides by the rules of the international order based on the values of human rights and democracy. In the meantime, let me stress that Taiwan will continue to demonstrate that it is an indispensable economic and security partner in the Indo-Pacific region. Just like at the onset of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Taiwan echoed like-minded partners and imposed economic sanctions on Russia. And we will continue to work with democratic countries to provide humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Finally, as Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen has affirmed, the maintenance of Taiwan's democracy, as well as regional peace and security, will remain imperative for the Taiwanese people. And Taiwan is committed to working with regional and global partners to achieve these objectives. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Representative. I failed to mention to the people who are watching online that you should feel free to start putting questions into the Q&A box now and throughout, and I'll get to that in the end, hopefully. And now let me turn to our next speaker, Bonnie Glaser. I've asked Bonnie to give us her views on sitting at her perch at GMF, German Marshall Fund, which is apparently not German, to tell us about the US and the European powers Indo-Pacific strategy and where she sees Taiwan fit in, and any fallout from the Ukrainian crisis too.
Well, thank you, Deepa. It's a privilege to be with all of you here this evening. The North American Taiwan Studies Association obviously brings together people who are really passionate about Taiwan. And you probably don't need me to tell you today that there's just been a surge of interest in Taiwan everywhere. But accompanying that surge, there continues to be a real dearth of knowledge. So I have to say the work that you're all doing is important. And I would really encourage you to try to find connections with policy where you can between the things you're working on in academia and things that are of interest to policymakers and to average publics, so that people can become more informed about Taiwan. Secondly, let me thank, in addition to NATSA, to DEPA and GW University, and I'd like to echo the comments that were made both by DEPA and by Deputy Representative Wang regarding condolences on the death and terrible, tragic loss of Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who has been such an inspiration for the idea of free and open Indo-Pacific, for the Quad, when he came up with the idea of the security diamond, but particularly relevant to all of us tonight, his support for Taiwan. And although there are many others in Japan who I think are passionate about Taiwan, I think he does stand in a class by himself, but hopefully there will be many who follow in his footsteps. Over the last few days, I was interviewed by Taiwan's Commonwealth magazine, and they're doing a story on Taiwan's defense. And they sent me some questions in advance. One of the questions really surprised me. And the question was, many Taiwanese people worry that the United States will seek to use Taiwan to weaken China. And as a result, the island could become a battleground similar to Ukraine. Do you think the Taiwanese people should worry about this? I was rather baffled by this question. Maybe US policy is much harder to understand from where people sit in Taiwan, or maybe it's because of the way that the issues pertaining to US policy are maybe sort of fractured through the lens of media in Taiwan. But I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk a bit about US policy today, and particularly why Taiwan is important to the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. This is you should all have an elevator speech, because people ask, why does Taiwan matter? And one of our friends in this field, Dr. Shelley Rigger, wrote a wonderful book on why Taiwan matters. It's a little outdated. I'll encourage her to update it. But the points in it, I think, remain very, very relevant today. There is no doubt in my mind that Taiwan is not seen by the United States as a card or a weapon to use against China. I have never heard a US official talk about how the US could use Taiwan to contain or weaken China. This narrative seems very popular. It's also rather popular in China, but it couldn't be more wrong. Taiwan is very much seen as a leading democracy that shares our values, as well as a crucial economic and security partner promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific, as Deputy Representative Wang has already talked about. So I'll talk in a little bit of detail about the myriad of ways that I think Taiwan matters. And this is, of course, not just to the United States, but so many countries around the world. It is a robust democracy that transitioned successfully from authoritarian rule, a transition that not very many countries have completed successfully. I recall that President George W. Bush declared when he was in power that Taiwan is a beacon of democracy. This is especially true for the 1.4 billion people in China. The American Institute in Taiwan, in its integrated country strategy report, it opens with the sentence, Taiwan is on the front lines of the global contest between democracy and authoritarianism. And this is, of course, very accurate. A few quick statistics about Taiwan's sort of rankings as a democratic country. It ranked the 8th most vibrant democracy in the world in the Economic Intelligence Unit's latest democracy index. And that's based on 5 key metrics: electoral process and pluralism, functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. And of course, Taiwan is a leader in all of those areas. Freedom House also ranked Taiwan as the 2nd freest country in Asia and the 7th in the world. I won't bore you with where the United States ranks in any of these listings, but let's just leave it at the fact that it's behind Taiwan. Taiwan delivers good governance to its people and public goods to the world. Its government provides development assistance and disaster relief. It's now our 8th largest trading partner. It is, of course, a powerhouse in the IT sector and contributes to the strengthening of the liberal rules-based international order. So the US views the Indo-Pacific region as the most economically and strategically consequential region in the world today and expects the influence of the region to grow over time. Taiwan then is seen as among our 4 most important partners in the Indo-Pacific region. And we share deep and abiding interests in maintaining a free and open and resilient Indo-Pacific. Taiwan's a strong partner on a range of issues: non-proliferation, sanctions enforcement, law enforcement matters. It aids, for example, in combating transnational crimes such as drug smuggling and human trafficking, as well as strengthening maritime security. Taiwan works closely with the US in promoting global supply chain resilience. It is, of course, a critical supplier of component parts, especially semiconductors, to the global supply chain, as well as a top partner to US businesses and institutions that research, develop, and utilize advanced innovations. Taiwan's role in reducing US dependence on vulnerable supply chains cannot be overstated. As a target of PRC disinformation and malign influence, Taiwan has developed effective ways to bolster societal resilience and develop best practices that it shares with other democracies around the world. And Deputy Representative Wong talked about the DCTF as being one example of a platform that enables Taiwan to share its best practices. Among the crucial contributions that Taiwan makes in the region is its role in preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's preparations for defending against a Chinese attack have never been more important than they are today. Deterring Beijing from using force to settle its territorial disputes is an essential part of US efforts to shape the environment around China and to influence the ways in which the PRC pursues its interests. In the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, preventing a PRC invasion of Taiwan has become even more urgent. Allies such as Japan have expressed grave concern about the potential for an unexpected war in the Indo-Pacific, and there is no doubt that Tokyo's greatest fear is a PRC takeover of Taiwan. As a bulwark against Chinese expansionism, Taiwan must develop greater capabilities to defend itself against an attack and to successfully deter any Chinese attempt to seize and control its territory. And this is not only the responsibility of Taiwan's military, it is also a task that its people must assume and prepare for. There are many important lessons that Taiwan can draw from the war in Ukraine, including the fierce resistance of the Ukrainian people in defending their homeland. Finally, I'd just like to say a bit about Europe, since I now work at the German Marshall Fund, and how Europeans view Taiwan today. In the past few years, Taiwan has garnered more attention in Brussels than ever before, as well as, of course, other European capitals. Taiwan is increasingly seen as a reliable, like-minded partner and a protector and advocate for rule of law and human rights, as well as a model of good governance. And the EU recently issued a few months ago its Indo-Pacific strategy, and that highlighted Taiwan's role in Europe's engagement with the region, especially in ensuring the stability of strategic supply chains and in regulating data protection. The COVID-19 pandemic was actually a key catalyst in increasing the EU's willingness to engage with Taiwan. At the time, the PRC was seen as unreliable, and Taiwan provided high-quality medical supplies. More recently, of course, we've seen the PRC's economic coercion against Lithuania after it opened a Taiwan representative office. And that remains a major cause of concern for the European Union. The European Parliament has articulated firm support for expanding links with Taiwan, including an EU-Taiwan bilateral investment agreement. We've seen many delegations from European parliaments as well as from throughout Europe that have visited Taiwan in recent years to signal support for Taiwan and promote closer ties. So this trend of growing support for Taiwan and increased desire to work together with Taiwan to advance shared objectives, both in the United States and Europe, is likely to continue. It's a function both of intensifying competition between democracies and the PRC, and the deepening conviction that the PRC poses a threat to our shared interests, our values, and our security, as well as the recognition that our relationships with Taiwan have intrinsic value in themselves, and they should be nurtured to advance a free and open Indo-Pacific, as Abe Shinzo would want us to do, as well as a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bonnie, for that clear and convincing case for, again, a greater engagement with Taiwan and how the Europeans also have a stake in it more and more increasingly. We have about 20 minutes. I said I'll try to end at 8, let's see. But let me just, if I may, before I open it up to the floor here and take other questions, if I could just pose a couple of questions to Ms. Wong and Bonnie. Let me start with you, Deputy Representative. You said in your remarks that Taiwan is going to try harder and harder to do more in the Indo-Pacific economic framework, which is something that I think Taiwan and supporters were quite disappointed that it was not in it as of yet. So how do you see Taiwan pushing its case for that? Where are the leverage points? Because the 4 key areas of the IPEF is supply chains, green energy, digital trade, and corruption, anti-corruption. So clearly in all of them, Taiwan has a lot of advantages. How do you intend to push that, especially with not just with the US, but the Quad countries, if you will, if any of those you see special effort in?
Thank you, Deepa, for the question. Yes, I think for Taiwan, we do hope to eventually take part in the new initiative IPAF. And I think from public comments made by US officials, the IPAF is still a rolling process, and it's not like it won't open to other participants in the future. So we do look for a good timing to be able to take part of that initiative. But in the meantime, as I mentioned earlier, that we started the US-Taiwan 21st initiative on trade. And in that discussion and negotiation, there are 11 items that will be discussed in that process. And actually many of the topics are covered also in IPAF. So we do hope that the new initiative will serve as a good foundation for our deepening engagement with the region. And also, during our, we do have some bilateral arrangement with like Singapore and New Zealand. And during the negotiation process, we already have the inspiration of joining a regional arrangement, like back then it was TPP or now CPTPP. So we already incorporate some high standard already made some high standard commitment in our previous negotiations. So we think these efforts have served as a quite good foundation for our future further engagement with countries in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just ask Bonnie a question. Given that the Indo-Pacific strategy is now formulated by several European countries like Germany and France, along with the United States, and each one has their own strategies. Do you see any differences in the way in which these countries, major countries, have formulated their strategy vis-a-vis Taiwan? And do you see one or the other having certain, calibrated in a way that maybe one can learn how to gain further for Taiwan from their specific strategies?
In the published reports of these strategies, there's very little mention of Taiwan in most, sort of a sentence or two, which is also true in, as Liang, you said earlier, the G7 statement, EU-US statement. I think that the common denominator among all European countries is support for Taiwan's democracy and seeing that there is a necessity to preserve peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. That said, I think that most of the EU members look to the governments in the EU, the parts of the Commission and other parts of the EU apparatus to set a tone and standard for the positions that they will take. But what's really interesting to me is that all of the countries in Europe, they all have a sort of a one China policy, but they all execute it differently and different from that of the United States. So there are some places, countries that are very comfortable in meeting with senior officials from Taiwan and hosting senior officials from Taiwan and allowing them to come to capitals, which my own country doesn't necessarily allow. So they all have their own experience and their own sort of procedures and practices that they put in place. But I think that the common threads are definitely growing support in parliaments, in the EU Parliament in particular, but also parliaments like recently there was in Washington a parliamentary delegation from Prague in the Czech Republic. That's an example of a country that's very, very supportive of Taiwan. Lithuania, again, being another. So there are some that are in the lead, others that maybe trail a little bit further behind. But there's definitely support for expanding economic contacts with Taiwan, talking with Taiwan about supply chain resilience. There are countries like Germany, very much in the lead in technology, that are very interested. So there's just a lot of issues that I think countries are willing to engage with Taiwan on and find ways to strengthen relations. Then you, of course, have differences to some extent about whether countries are concerned about China's reaction of taking, maybe even retaliatory measures against them. You have in the lead some of the Baltic states, which say, we don't care, go ahead, do whatever you want, we're going to stand up for Taiwan. And then there are others that have more of a debate, within their country. This is really rapidly evolving. And I think if we're sitting here a couple of years from now, we will see that there's been a lot of movement in the direction of further strengthening the ties with Taiwan.
Thank you so much. That really shows how quickly things can change and how perhaps over time, the more and more there is a kind of normalization of discussion and discourse, then it begins to lay the foundation for further action. So thank you for being patient. I can now open it up to questions, and I think there are mics, right? Or a mic? Yes, right there. And then, yes.
I'm coming from New York, and I've been heard about defense Taiwan for many, many years. My question to Representative Wang is about, from the defense kind of a concept, Taiwan should be develop your own strike attack capability to mainland China if the initial war. to eliminate the war, preventing the war from the early stage. And also, as Taiwan security is number one for the democracy of the future of Taiwan, should urge all the Taiwan company entrepreneurs to be cautiously invested in mainland anymore or move something out as soon as possible.
Thank you. I should have said to just identify yourself.
My name is Pan, coming from New York. I'm a solo international businessman, and I'm building factories in US, and I close factories in Asia. I moved back to US for manufacture, and I believe in manufacturing US in certain way can be the Chinese imports. Thank you.
Thank you. Easy question for you.
Thank you very much, Pim, for your question. I will answer your second question first regarding the investment in China. I think seeing the coercive behavior China is taking towards Lithuania, and also I think COVID-19 has made business understand that they need to find a more stable investment environment. So I think we already start to see countries, business, not only Taiwanese business, but also business from other countries to diversify from their investment in China. And in the meantime, I think for my government, we did started the new southbound policy when the current government took office, and we are seeing progress on that as well. So that's one of the area that we are working on, and I think democratic countries can also work together to, as we discussed in our previous discussion, to secure a more resilient supply chain without being disturbed by those political factors. And regarding military preparedness, I think we are our defense ministry does have a very clear strategy, and we are also in very close discussions with like-minded countries when it comes to our national defense preparedness. And as I mentioned in my remarks, that we do have a focus on the asymmetric capabilities on our preparedness. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. I saw several hands that went down. There was one question here, and then the two of you. Meantime, if there are other questions, just think about them. Okay. So,
Thank you. I'm a student from GW. My question is about India and Taiwan's cooperation. Since we're talking about Indo-Pacific region, the term has changed from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific. And there's many experts in Washington talking about India sitting on the fence between Russia and the US all the time. We have to shift the trajectory of India towards the West, towards the democracy. And there's many things Taiwan and India can work on talent, technologies, even defense capabilities. My question will be, is there a strong will or interest from Taiwan to cooperate with India? And vice versa from India, is that feeling mutual to Taiwan?
I'll start. I'm sure even Deepa has something to add on this. I did some work in the new southbound policy several years ago, and I think India is one of the most important countries in the new southbound policy. And there's been a lot of encouragement to bring more Indian students to Taiwan. Of course, this pre-COVID was fairly successful. Probably needs to be further encouraged going forward. But there's also connections with some of the companies whereby Indians would come and study in Taiwan and then spend some time maybe working in companies. There's been a lot of efforts to get more Taiwanese investment in India. and encourage clusters to move so that they would be able to support doing work in the IT sector. Doing work in India and starting moving companies to India is not easy, but I think it's something that both governments very much support. So my sense is that there's growing interest in India. There's definitely interest in Taiwan in strengthening this relationship. And so I think we will see this continue to expand going forward. This is so far has pretty much been under the radar in terms there hasn't been much of an impact on the India-China relationship, which I think is a very good thing, that this has not sort of come up in that context. In fact, India, maybe you can tell us, Steve, India has stopped talking about its one China policy many, many years ago, but I'll let you explain that.
All right, just very quickly, everything I agree with what Bonnie said. I think also COVID, from my own personal experience in India, working on it, I see that the soft power of Taiwan went way up in India during COVID because the contrast between China and Taiwan in this case was so stark. There was so much more media coverage of Taiwan than I've ever seen in any Indian newspapers over the last 2-3 years. And so I think there has been a turning point. And so there's a much greater political will because, as you know, there's been many more showdowns with China and India on the border. And although they're not connected, they try to keep it separate, there is a link. And I do think that there's going to be, apart from the economic, the people to people will be a big draw. So, I will start with that. Let's see. Other questions? Yes, you were next.
Thank you very much. I'm a graduate student of the GW, and I'm from Japan. So before my question, thank you for all you expressed the message for the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And also I really appreciate to the leaders and also people from all over the world expressed the message for our great politician. Thank you very much. My question is about the action from the China. So it is said that Xi Jinping will continue his position. He will start third term of his position this maybe fall, and his third term will end in 2027, and also the 2027 is the 100th anniversary of the PLA. And it is said that maybe the Xi Jinping and also the PLA may act something in that year. So my question is that if you have any perspective about the future action of China, maybe in the security context or maybe some other context. So maybe I think maybe Bonnie is the best person to answer my question.
Be happy to defer to you if you prefer. I think that when Admiral Phil Davis, who was formerly the commander of Indo-Pacific, made the statement that he did when testifying last year about how an attack on Taiwan could take place within the next 6 years, I think it was very much based on an assessment of evolving PLA capabilities. Capabilities are very important, but when you think about the threat, you have to combine capabilities with intent. And it is worth noting that when our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, testified before Congress several months later, that he said that he did not see any evidence of intent. That could change, and so the preparation is necessary whether you see intent or not. If the capabilities are there, if the PLA and the Chinese Communist Party have some relative high level of confidence they actually could seize and control Taiwan. So this is really what is driving the urgency. That said, I think we should be quite clear about at least what has and has not been said authoritatively by Chinese leaders. And when Xi Jinping spoke at the 19th Party Congress, which was now almost 5 years ago, he did lay out two sets of objectives, one for 2049 and one set for 2035. The military goal for 2035 was described as basically having a professional PLA, modern capabilities. And then in 2049, having world-class military. But he didn't say anything about 2027. So yes, 2027 is the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the PLA. I think that the Chinese are talking about it in particular to mark the anniversary, to demonstrate their resolve, both to the domestic audience as well as the outside world. But I've seen no evidence that the Chinese have pulled forward the 2035 goal to 2027, even though there have been some very senior officials in the United States who have said that that's true. So I welcome anybody citing any evidence that I'm wrong. I do try to follow this closely. And so I think that 2027 is not a deadline for taking over Taiwan as it has been suggested by some people in the press.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me see if there's questions around the room because, okay, one, there are three questionnaires left and we've got maybe 5 minutes more. So can I take maybe two questions and then see if we have space with you? And right there.
Hi, I was wondering, I know that.
Sorry, identify yourself, please.
My name is Melissa Cho. I'm a recent graduate from AU and a current researcher at the University of Maryland. I know that young Taiwanese men have in recent years had an apathy towards mandatory military service. So I was wondering if China's increased aggression and as well as the invasion of Ukraine, if that has changed this apathy, if they're more interested in joining the military.
Hold that thought for a minute. Let's just take the other two that way.
First and foremost, I wanted to thank the panelists for coming to speak with us today. My name is Andy Schufer, and I'm a student at William & Mary, who has had the wonderful opportunity to do research on Chinese development finance in developing countries. So I wanted to ask about that. China has seen an increasingly sophisticated effort to use information warfare, especially with local and social media, to try to influence opinions, especially on Taiwan. How has Taiwan and the US tried to fight back against that to try to better allow these developing countries to increase their support towards Taiwan's integration into multilateral institutions? Thank you.
Okay, and last question. Yes. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm Pranav Patadatunadeville. I'm an incoming sophomore at Yale, a South Asia research intern at the Hudson Institute. So my question is, there's been an argument about a silicon shield for Taiwan. This idea that because China is dependent on semiconductors from Taiwan, and Taiwan's ability to maybe sabotage the semiconductor infrastructure, the chips that they make, that this could potentially deter China from conducting some kind of attack. So I was wondering, could you rate the kind of validity of that argument, and do you really see that silicon shield as a deterrent against a Chinese invasion?
Okay, thank you for those great questions. Which one of you wants to, I think, Deputy Representative, there were a couple of questions directed to you.
Yes, thank you for all these questions. Regarding, I think one lesson Taiwanese has learned from the Russian invasion to Ukraine is that our will to resist invasion count, and that's one of the key factor that will help us to defend ourselves. So I think after the invasion, from the opinion polls does show that Taiwanese people has a very high willingness to defend ourselves. And as I mentioned earlier, that we are also looking into the reserve reform. And we are trying to take lessons from the war in Ukraine to better prepare ourselves. And in terms of disinformation, I think also take from the Ukraine situation, disinformation also plays an important role in the war. And for Taiwan, because I think because of the language, so it's very easy for Taiwanese to receive information from China, and also they also work with local influencers to inject those information in our society. So we do see that as a issue of great concern, and the government already worked with private sectors to work on some response measures. And we think the most important thing is to expose those information. And also the government needs to be transparent. And I think transparency is the key. So now the government agencies are very quickly in pointing out the disinformation and provide the accurate information. And also we work with NGOs that to provide real-time fact check. And also I think it's important to, I think actually for free flow of information, that's also one way to then the society have better understanding of the whole picture of related discussions. And so regarding the silicon shield issue, I think that's also related to your earlier question. I think none of us can really put ourselves into Xi Jinping's mind. But one important thing is that we need to let China knows that if they take irrational action, the cost will be too high. And I think through the war in Ukraine, democratic countries is also showing that. And also I think now for semiconductor industry, I think more than 60% semiconductors are chips are produced by Taiwanese companies, and more than 90% of the advanced chips are produced by Taiwanese companies. So I think if in a worst case scenario, that not only affect Taiwan, but also it will affect tremendously the international in other countries. Yeah.
So very briefly, I think that as the gentleman from William and Mary, I was just down at a conference there a couple of weeks ago, and I'm very familiar with the work that AData has done. And one of the things that they have found is that Chinese development assistance is often given to countries, developing countries, to get them to support their One China principle. And there's a very close correlation between countries, recipient countries, getting some development assistance from China and supporting Taiwan supporting China's position on Taiwan in the United Nations. This is something that the United States, I think, has not actually very effectively countered. We haven't very effectively competed with China's development assistance programs around the world. But there is now a new rebranding of the Build Back Better World. It's now, I think, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure, I think is what it's being called. But this is, of course, only part of the problem. And some of it is disinformation, but some of it is just really China trying to drum up support for its One China principle. And it has been quite effective in some developing countries. And the question regarding the Silicon Shield, I would just say that I think that deterrence is very complex. We can't think about it as exclusively military, from the military perspective. When China thinks about its own use of pressure on Taiwan, there's a very strong psychological component to that. And increasingly, there are economic and diplomatic components as well. So I think in the way that we respond to the Chinese threats against Taiwan, that we have to be equally creative. And the Pentagon is now talks about integrated deterrence, and Taiwan has to think about deterrence in these many different ways as well. So it's about signaling in peacetime that it would fight to defend itself, and that it has the capabilities to do so. But I don't think that Silicon Shield in and of itself is the best answer for strengthening deterrence.
Well, I think you'll agree that we've had two brilliant, insightful speakers this evening. And I, for one, have had a lot of fun on this Saturday night. I hope you did too. And you'll notice again that it was an all-women panel. It can be done. Good night.